Welcome back to another episode of the Young Guides podcast. I'm Keaton, and this is...
I'm Kyle.
But first, a word from our partners.
First up, we want to talk about Heather's Choice. If you go to the Heather's Choice website and use our code TheYoungGuides15 at checkout, you can get yourself 15% off site-wide. So go check them out. We got packaroons for snacks. We got dinners. We got breakfasts. We got a bunch of new recipes coming out to you guys. So head on over to heatherschoice.com at checkout. Use our code TheYoungGuides15 and get you guys something for your next outdoor adventure.
Awesome. For our next partner, we have Lucky Bug Lures, home of the Bingo Bug, Zombie Max, Fusion Extreme, Lucky Plug, F-Bomb, and Pike Bomb. They take conventional lures and change them up a little bit, and it helps your fishing and your luck on the water. Go check them out. www.luckybuglures.com. Go get yours today.
All right. Up next, we have Northern Knits. Emily up here in Anchorage knits wool hats and distributes them through her social media platforms. You can find her on Facebook or on Instagram. Her Instagram account is northern._.knits. And you can see some of the hats that she has in stock and order from there, or you can kind of get an idea of what you want, message her, and you can set something up to have a specific pattern or color scheme that you want in your hat. Keaton and I both have one. Well, I actually have several. Keep you very warm. They're very fashionable. They look great. They feel great. You'll look awesome if you wear one. So check her out, Northern Knits.
Next up, we have a friend, Matt, at Alaska Rod Co. He just released a new lineup of rods for the 2022 season. They have a lineup of 8 freshwater spinning rods with actions and power for anglers chasing big, aggressive fish. With lengths ranging from 6 foot to 9 foot, there are plenty of options for various applications and style. In a world full of mass-produced rods, Alaska Rod Co. makes sure that rods and services provide what other brands cannot. Rods built and tested in Alaska.
Matt also is coming out with a new line of fly rods. Alaska Rod Co. fly rods are built for harsh environments while maintaining the utmost level of craftsmanship. Right now, Alaska Rod Co. is 9-foot fly rods ranging from 5 weights to 8 weights. 10-foot single-hand rods, switch, and spare rods will be available late winter or spring. There's enough rod companies out there trying to build the next lightest and flashy rod. Alaska Rod Co. is here to build you a rod you can pass down generations. Fishing means many things to many different people. Alaska Rod Co. is honored to build you the ultimate tool that connects you to that meaning.
If you want to learn a little bit more about Alaska Rod Company, go back and check our previous podcast. We asked him several questions about his rods, his warranties. He does a great job at explaining everything and covering everything about his company. Also, if you have questions, you can always DM him or DM us and we can get you going in the right direction. So, Alaska Rod Co.
Finally, we want to say thank you for listening to another episode of the Young Guides podcast. If you can, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review and a rating. It helps us know that we're doing this for the right reasons, and you guys are giving us some great feedback already. You can also head over to Spotify. They now have a rating feature on the podcast there. So if you could let us know how we're doing, that would be great. It also helps helps us spread the word through you. But makes us pop up on the feeds wherever you listen to podcasts a lot more if you give us a great rating and a great review. You can also head to our website and contact us through that form if there's anything that you think we should know about, if you want to be on our show, or if there's something that we need to work on. You can also find us on Instagram, and same thing, give us some feedback, drop us a message, and we will get back to you.
With Instagram, make sure to also check our story. We before we do our podcast on Thursdays, we always have an option for you guys to ask questions to the people coming on our podcast. And we post a lot of stuff that we like to get viewers and people following us involved. So if you want to head on over, give us a follow and start asking questions and join in on the fun on our Instagram page.
Without further ado, here's the episode.
Welcome back to another episode of the Young Guides podcast. I'm Keaton, and this is...
I'm Kyle.
So today on our podcast, we have Adrian Gemenez. Very excited to have him on. Recreational bass fisherman, knows a lot of stuff. I knew Adrian probably since high school, maybe even before that. And I've been following him along, and he's a great bass fisherman. He fishes all over Washington State, but he fishes, big lakes, little lakes, variety of times of the years. And so I thought, what great knowledge to bring him on and kind of just talk about bass fishing and maybe talk about the upcoming season. Without further ado, here is Adrian. How are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for bringing me on the podcast. I'm excited to talk about bass fishing. It's something I'm very passionate about, so it's always fun to talk to young anglers and just anglers alike, spread my knowledge about bass fishing, especially here in Washington State.
For sure. So, Adrian, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into the outdoors and into fishing?
Yeah. So I first started fishing when I was about 5 to 6 years old. I wasn't born in Washington State. I was actually born on a little island called Guam. And I actually started saltwater fishing there. So my dad and I would drive about 10 minutes to a little boat launch, and we would just, cast little shrimp, crab, octopus, anything that we could cast out there. And that's how I kind of got into fishing. And then after that, I moved to California when I was about, I'd say 10 years old. And that's where I really immersed myself in saltwater fishing. So I started fishing off of piers. My grandpa on my dad's side, he ended up getting a boat, and we take it out all the time, and we take it out to the ocean, and we caught there's these species called mackerel, bonita, pretty much warm water, saltwater species. And from there, I'd say and then 5 years later, around when I was 15, that's when I moved to Washington State. And that's where I started bass fishing. So I've been doing it for quite a long time now. And to touch up on it, I did do a little bass fishing in California, here and there, but it wasn't something that I really focused on, just because ocean fishing was kind of my thing then and there. But then when I moved to Washington State, that's when I really started to go bass fishing and learn tools of the trade and what to do and what to use and techniques to learn. The very first bass I caught was on Lake Washington in Gene Coulon Park, actually, which is the very southern end of Lake Washington. And then from there, I kind of just took off, and now it's like I can't stop doing it.
Nice.
Awesome. So you kind of missed the ball when you didn't do any bass fishing in California, because I heard California has some phenomenal fisheries.
Yeah, they do. So the way they manage their fisheries is just equation for big bass. They do stock a lot of trout there, and they have a lot of reservoirs. So those trout get big, and those bass actually have a lot of access to deep water for them to get big, and they feed on the trout all day. But yeah, I did kind of miss it. I actually went this year, springtime, early March, and I caught a few on Clear Lake. But yeah, I definitely missed it when I was younger.
Gotcha.
So why do you like bass fishing over other fisheries, like other fishing options that you can do in Washington?
I think it's the versatility. I can, with enough knowledge, I can fish bass practically all year long, depending on the lake, of course. But I think it's kind of just like hunting to me. I can pattern these fish, and once you kind of pattern them, you kind of know what to do and what to throw. And then I think it's the whole sense of just figuring them out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like the aggressiveness of these fish when it comes to, just throwing lures and baits and having them attack your lures and baits.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. So, what got you what made you want to try bass fishing in Washington? Like, what was going from saltwater and doing that in California when you moved up? Like, what made you say, I want to try doing bass fishing?
Yeah. So I actually have a little story. So as I already said, I caught my first bass on on Lake Washington at Gene Coulon Park. The reason why I chose that spot was, one, I lived about 5 minutes, like 5 to 10 minutes up the hill from there, so I could just drive down. And to get back to the story, I went. So it was kind of my first day, or I would say first weekend in Washington State. I wanted to check the area out, so we went down to the park. Gene Coulon Park, and I sat on this dock, and there was this guy fishing for bass, and he was throwing a stick bait, a Senko, which is pretty much just a soft plastic stick bait, and he threw it at the rocks. And he was throwing and throwing and casting and casting, and usually I'm just familiar with throwing just the weight on the bottom with a bait or bait under a bobber. But yeah, he was constantly casting and retrieving, and I was very curious to what he was fishing for. And before I could even go up to him and ask what he was fishing for, he actually hooked into a 4-pound smallmouth.
Wow.
And that's a pretty decent bass. And after that, I was like, maybe I should give it a shot, because I'm always open to learning new things and curious. So in that exact same spot, I came back, I believe, the next weekend, and I remember throwing those little Berkeley gulp worms. They were in the little glass containers with the black caps on them. I threw it under a bobber, and I ended up catching a smallmouth bass on that same spot. It wasn't as big, but I would say that gentleman that caught that bass in front of me, I was such a young gun. I was so astonished by this 4-pound smallmouth that he just pulls out of the water. And that's kind of why, I decided to try it.
Heck yeah. That's awesome.
When you kind of dove into like bass fishing, and I mean, we all kind of join at some point some type of fishing, and then it becomes an obsession. But did you find like a community that was welcoming around you, or did it take a bit, like you had to figure some stuff out and then you started meeting people along the way?
That's a good question. Because with the bass fishing community, to be honest, I would say it's not as open as I would say other type of fishing, just because I think bass fishing is very it really it depends on the location. It's heavily on location, and most guys aren't willing to share the location of where they caught their fish. That's kind of with with other things too, but with bass fishing, I kind of had to take, my own steps and learn along the way. And
Yeah.
then from there, I kind of made friends um, along my journey. I didn't really get that much assistance in, learning
Yeah.
the bass fish here. So
Well, that makes sense. I mean, compared to uh, like other communities, I mean, fishing's kind of getting this way where it's like, oh, don't share anything because
yeah.
fishing's getting tougher and tougher. With like the amount of fish depends on the fishery and everything. But I've noticed that, especially in like going from like maybe the fly fishing community that's like more welcoming to like give you information. Like you try to approach that same energy to like the bass community. And the bass community is going to be like, well, you can go here and they'll give you like a lake and they might give you like a few things to try, but they're not going to tell you like where to go or what depth to use that at, or like, which is like nothing on the bass community. I think it's more of a competitive community than like other communities per se.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's also kind of, I mean, I guess you can say egotistic, because I think a lot of the bass fishing community, it's really all about size, Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you haven't noticed, but like you'll see people posting photos of a big bass, and then they'll blur the background, or they'll do something along those lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say you could take the same energy, ask, I don't know, go on any forum and ask, if you saw a photo of a bass that was caught, ask where it was. They usually don't share it or even give you the lake name or even,
Yeah.
a general area, like 100 miles of that general area. But yeah,
It's crazy. I mean, everyone's got their own thing, but
yeah. I mean, I get it, because a lot of these guys, they work their butts off to get that fish, because it is here in Washington, the average bass size is 2 to 3 pounds, and to get something over 4 to 5 pounds, it takes a lot of work. Sometimes you get lucky, but yeah, it does take a lot of work. So
yeah, that makes sense.
No, I mean, you see things like growing up on the Sportsman's Channel, right? Or like growing up, bass fishing is like, I feel like that's like the image of fishing, right? I mean, I feel like that's like the most um, easily accessible fish for most of the population of the United States. Whereas up in like the Pacific Northwest, you really, I mean, obviously there's good bass fishing, but it's not like that's not the number one thing, right? Because we have steelhead and we have salmon, whereas a lot of those other places don't. And I feel like there's just more people that do it, and then you do have kind of tend to find some of that with the bigger population fishing, that you tend to find people who are more about the big fish photos, or getting a whole bag of fish, and like tournaments, for example, is a good way to look at it, because you don't see, I mean, you might see like a salmon derby, right, or like the biggest salmon of the day or most trout or whatever, but there's nothing huge and like as organized as a bass fishing tournament.
yeah, like you said, it's so widespread. I mean, you have both smallmouth and largemouth in in 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense.
Another way to add on, Kyle, is kind of like it was more of like a production fish in some ways. Like you're gonna see that more on television than like just recently we're starting to see like fly fishing and trout fishing, or I mean you still see salmon stuff here and there, but it's like when it comes down to it, you're gonna go on that channel and it was gonna be for the majority like MLF or someone's bass fishing or someone's backyard bass fishing. So I think it was more of easier to make a production and teach someone about that than like going through the skill sets of trying to teach someone in a 30-minute period about fly fishing. So let's we kind of talked about like why you got into fishing, kind of the things about bass fishing, but let's get into some detailed stuff. If So, like, what is your favorite time of the year to fish for bass?
Ooh, favorite time of the year. I would say the fall time.
The fall time?
Yeah. Um it's definitely one of my favorite time of the year to fish for bass just cuz just like I mean everything else they're getting ready for the winter time. So they're a lot more vulnerable. There you could trick them a lot easier with lures.
Yeah.
They just want to eat, they want to feed up, and depending on the lake they school up. So if you catch one, you can catch multiples, and that's usually when you could catch your personal best. So fall time has to be one of my favorite seasons.
That's awesome.
Nice. Real quick, I wanted to ask this question before you get too deep. When you're looking at like Washington State, how would you break it up? Like West Side versus East Side? I feel like in a lot of ways we're unique with the Columbia River and all those reservoirs that it creates. Like how do you break up Washington? I guess real quick.
Yeah, I mean exactly as you put it. I West side and east side, most of the things you apply in east side you could apply to most lakes on the east side, and the same with western Washington. You could go all the way up north by Bellingham and fish the same techniques, go down south by Vancouver, Washington, and fish the same techniques. So that's how I kind of break it up. Western Washington, Eastern Washington, very similar techniques for both sides.
Nice. Do you find the same techniques being used, like if you go fish a river compared to a lake, or do you feel like you have to change your patterns and techniques up?
Uh, it varies depending on what we were talking about, but yes, I am gonna change it up just because the biggest thing is water flow is what changes your presentation
Yeah.
and how that lure gets to that fish and where the fish sit too, with seams and whatnot. So
Yeah, I figure it's pretty similar to almost most fish in a river. They're going to find their feeding lanes and stuff like that.
yep, exactly.
So break it down then. So you say your favorite time is fall. Say you have the option to go fish anywhere for the day in Washington State for bass. Where would you choose to go, and like how are you going to approach that fishery for the day?
Hmm. I would. I'm gonna break it down into two parts here. So
Sure.
I'll mention a lake in Western Washington, and then I'll mention another body of water in Eastern Washington. The first body of water is in Western Washington is Lake Washington. It's it's a very urban fishery. I mean, it's in the heart of Seattle, but the smallmouth fishing there is is excellent in the fall time. Um, so the way I would approach it is usually what these fish do is when the water temp drops to I'd say around 60 to 64 degrees is when they'll really start to school up, and they'll they'll school up around I would say anywhere from it really varies anywhere from 15 to 25 feet, and this is specifically for smallmouth in Lake Washington. I kind of wanted to focus on that because they rule that lake. They are the apex predators in that lake. There is some largemouth spots there, but anyways, yeah, the smallmouth will school up around 15 to 25 feet. So what I would do is I would find main lake points. So it really helps if you could read a, a topographical map, because you can find main lake points, and any main lake points you want to fish on the steeper side. So the side that goes from shallow to deep extremely fast. because they can move up and down that and just feed on bait fish. And I like to throw moving baits this time of the year. I like to cover water because there is that saying where I think it's 90, I can't remember what it was. I think it's like 90% of the fish is in the 10% of, that body of water. And that cannot be more true for fall fishing, because that's why I like to cover water. That's why I like to throw moving baits. So a couple of examples would be like a spinner bait, which is a wire with a skirt on it, and then maybe like usually 2 to 3 blades. I like to cast that. It gives off a little shine. It imitates a school of bait fish, and then I'll throw like a crankbait, which pretty much you just cast that out, crank it down to desired depth usually. And then another one is if it's really slow and the fish aren't really honing in on those moving baits, it's called a drop shot, and that's one of the best techniques, my go-to techniques in Washington State. I mean, it's just a weight and then a hook, and then you have like a soft plastic, your choice of soft plastic on the hook, and then I'll just focus on just points, and that's pretty much the general rule for success there, and can't really go wrong there.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then Eastern Washington, that's a lot of fun. I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's definitely not as hard, just because obviously not as much people, these fish are not accustomed to much lures. But as far as Eastern Washington goes, if I would say around like kind of near trying to figure out whether I should mention
Well, you don't have to mention anything either. If you see a reservoir or a lake.
yeah, I was trying to figure out whether or not I should mention the Columbia or one of the lakes I go to. Okay, let's just say Potholes Reservoir, just because I'm super familiar with that area.
For sure.
It's one of the well-known areas in Eastern Washington once you pass Vantage. So, but yeah, Potholes Reservoir. Now, with it really depends, because the water levels rise and fall there, but generally we're going to be talking about largemouth bass.
Nice.
So same water temp, around the same water temp at least. But what dictates these fish to heavily feed is actually not just water temp, and it's actually the length of day. These fish survive out there. They know when winter time's coming. The length of day kind of triggers their feeding mood. With largemouth, with this technique, they generally don't school up. So what they'll do in Potholes Reservoir is there's a lot of these trees, a lot of shallow trees up north, the northern side of the lake, and they'll move up there to feed because there's a lot of bait fish there and a lot of cover. It's super easy for them to ambush things. Largemouth bass are more of an ambush compared to smallmouth bass, where they're more of a chase down and eat, where a largemouth will just hide in ambush. So in Potholes, I'll throw a swim jig. So it's just a weighted jig head with a skirt, and then I'll throw like a soft plastic behind it, like a swim bait that would imitate a bluegill, a crawfish, any of that stuff. And the Potholes, one of the best colors, I don't like to tell people this, but one of the best colors in Potholes is just straight black. Because believe it or not, the reason why the fish in there get so big is because they feed a lot on the bullhead catfish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they do. I've caught many bass with bullhead catfish down their throat. I mean, I don't know if it's their first option because honestly, that would probably be the last thing I'd eat because of their spines. But yeah, they feed a lot on the bullhead catfish there. So like a black or just a straight brown
Yeah.
works excellent there. And then you would do like a spinner bait, as I mentioned before, a swim jig, which is practically like a spinner bait just without the wires and the blade. If it's windy out and it's like partly sunny to sunny, then I'll throw that spinner bait to get that shine from those blades. But if it's cloudy or it's semi calm, then I'll go ahead and pick up that swim jig, um, just because it also goes through cover a lot better. And
Yeah.
then one more bait would be like a frog, just because it's so shallow. So any weedless topwater lure will work. Like a frog. Uh, one of my a couple of my favorites are classic ones. It's like a Spro bronze-eye frog in black. You want that darker color to silhouette up against that sky, or like a live target frog. You could practically, I mean, use any lure, a topwater lure. It just has to be realistic. It has to go through that cover. So
Yeah.
yeah. So Potholes Reservoir, Eastern Washington, just past Vantage. Just go shallow, um, fish the trees, weave your way in and out. And then Western Washington, kind of focus on that 15 to 25 feet for smallmouth bass, and you'll find them schooling. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a easy, beginner recipe for success, and you kind of work your way from there.
So in the different seasons of the year, do you find that these fish will like move and then settle into a certain depth and then move and settle into the next depth, like going back and forth? Or do you find that like almost in the spring they'll come all the way shallow and then as the year goes on they start moving deeper and deeper and deeper?
Yeah, we can kind of talk about the different seasons, just because it's a little bit easier to understand.
Yeah.
So let's start with spring, since spring is practically here. A lot of the lakes open up on April 30th, I believe. So these fish are going to be coming from their wintering holes, right? So usually the deepest part of the lake. So, and the reason why they do that is because there's actually what's called a turnover. So in the fall time, the warmer water will turn over. It's so easy that it's hard to explain, but it's quite literally the warm water. So there's warm water up top and then cold water down low, and then it kind of flips once it hits a certain temperature. So that's a turnover, a fall turnover, and that line that separates the warm water and the cold water is called the thermocline. In the fall time, that flips over, so these fish will go to. That's why the fish, they usually go to the deepest holes, on that lake. So, on that lake, on a particular type of lake. So from their wintering holes, that's when they'll move up to spawn. So the whole goal, the whole premise for these fish is to feed and spawn. That's all they want to do, right? So they'll go from the deep holes, and then they'll make their way to a main lake point. From the main lake point, they'll go to a secondary point, and then from the secondary point, then that's when they'll make their way to a flat, is where they'll do their spawning, they'll do their cruising, then that's where they'll kind of search breeding grounds and whatnot. And it doesn't have to be a main lake point or a secondary point. If you were to let's say Lake Desire in Maple Valley, it's a round lake. There's really only that one point there. If it's a lake like that that's shaped like a bowl, they'll move up to the ends of docks. So they'll focus on the ends of the docks, and then they'll work the way shallow. If there's wood there, they really like wood in the springtime because it actually holds a lot of heat, especially when the sun's out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've felt, a piece of wood in the sun that's been submerged. It's like a degree or two warmer, and those fish will literally hug it. So yeah, so they'll have their backs up against to it, or sometimes what they'll do in the springtime is they'll be sunning, and they'll go so shallow that you'll see these fish's back, like in inches of water.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Those fish are kind of hard to catch because they're spooky, but yeah, they're doing that. They're sunning. But yeah, if like Lake Desire, it's a it's a bowl. So it's literally just imagine a bowl. That's how Lake Desire is. That's actually how a lot of the lakes over by that area are.
Yeah.
So if that was the case, then you'd focus on ends of docks, and they'll kind of follow the docks. They'll follow the posts, work their way shallower. In that case, the best docks are the longest docks because they have that access to deep water, and they literally just could follow the post all the way to shallow water, spawn, be done, and then follow their way out again. So
yeah, cool.
yeah. And then summertime. Did you want me to talk about the summertime and
Yeah, absolutely.
their migrate? Okay.
I love summertime bass fishing.
Oh
and
yeah.
I just like it because I think I get to be in a tank top and it's sunny. Get to catch some big fish too.
I also like to tell people summer's the best time. If you're like a trout guy, is just give those trout a break because it's so hot. And as trout are cold water fish. It's nice to just fish for bass and kind of give the trout a break.
Yeah.
Because their survival rate in that warm water is not the best. So
Not at all. Especially those summertime rivers and creeks. They get pretty warm around here.
Yeah, they do. So once they move into the shallow area and the flats, they've done their breeding, or they've done their spawn. The male will stay back and defend the nest up until the eggs hatch and the fry. I mean, they'll take care of their fry for like 2 to 3 weeks, and then the females. This is why I say like those longer docks are the best, is because the females will actually. So they do 2 things. One, they go into the heaviest, nastiest cover because they need to recover.
Yeah.
Or 2, they go out to deeper water. And generally speaking, the females are always going to be the bigger fish. So yeah, the females, when they'll go into heavy cover or they'll go into deeper water to recover, and they'll during that time they're catchable because they want to eat as well because they're hungry, they're exhausted.
Yeah, they lost all that weight.
Yep, they lost all that weight. They kind of need to recuperate and get all that weight back, and they need to get their nutrients back. So that's what the females will do, and then the males stay back. If any lake here in Washington, come like mid-May, you could go to any lake, go to the shallows. If there's bass, there's gonna be a male guarding its bed.
Yeah.
You'll see fry everywhere. It practically just looks like black dots in the water, and there will be a male close to there. And that's kind of the post. We like to call post spawn. It's kind of a weird situation because it could either be extremely good or it could be really tough to fish. So that's post spawn, and then from there you have early summer. So summer, pretty much. I would categorize early summer and post spawn kind of together. But yeah, summer bass fishing. Did you want to talk about like smallmouth or largemouth, anything specific? Because it really varies on the technique.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle, what do you think?
I would maybe hit a little bit of each. Just brief overview.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, so largemouth, they'll generally stay. So once that post spawn early summer is kind of over, then these females will actually move back into the shallows, just because there's much more food there, right? So they don't have to work as hard. All the food is there. Bluegill spawn is about to happen. The sunfish, the bluegill, they're about to spawn, so that's easy meals for them. My favorite, what you want to look for in summer for largemouth, especially when it gets extremely hot, is shade. It could be anything. It could be like a little shadow that's casted from the tree on the shoreline. It could be lily pads. It could be a dock, under a dock, any of those things. You want to focus on the shade line. Usually those fish will be sitting in the shade and they'll be looking out onto the sun, not into the sun, but kind of out where that shade line is, just because that sun will shine on that bait fish and they could see it much easier.
Yeah.
So I would say 3 baits I would throw in the summer for largemouth. One is a Senko, which is it's a soft plastic stick bait, wacky rig. So you just fold that stick bait in half. Take like a number one or a 1 or a 1/0 hook and just hook it dead center. And you would just cast it to the docks, and then you would just pretty much just let it shimmy, because 90% of the time they'll hit it on the fall.
Yeah.
So, and then 2 is a frog. These fish are aggressive. These fish, the water's warm, so they're moving extremely fast. Their metabolism is through the roof, so they need to eat. So if they see a frog, in the shade line or up against the shore, especially, they'll pinpoint that and they'll target that. Generally, frog fishing and largemouth bass in the summer just go hand in hand, because you're generally around cover for largemouth in the summertime. And then 3rd, I would say, is a Texas rig. So what it is, it's just you have your main line, and then usually you'll have like a bobber stop on that main line, and then you'll have a sliding weight, depending on the size of the soft plastic lure you're using, like a 3 to 4/0 EWG hook. And then you'll throw a creature bait. It just imitates like a crawfish or a bluegill.
Yeah. And in the summertime, are you finding these fish making more? Are they more willing to chase down your baits compared to like other times of the year?
So it yes, because like I said, the water's warm, right? But if it gets too hot, just like everything else, they get sluggish.
Yeah,
So if that water temperature raises, like the water temp's too high or the sun's too high and it's midday, of course there's exceptions to that, but yes, they will chase the bait a little bit more. They are willing to travel further distances to get that bait just because the water is warm. But yeah.
nice. So let's kind of loop back and let's, spring fishing's here. Let's kind of get some rundowns on what kind of rods are you running? What kind of setups are you running? Do you prefer like bait casters? Do you prefer spinning rods? And then like, what size are you doing? Like a medium heavy, or do you like light rods? Kind of what's your preference on that?
So for largemouth bass, I like to run medium to medium heavy rods, anywhere from 7 to 7.5 feet. That's generally what I have on there. And then the line depends on the lure I'm using. So let's say if I was using the Texas rig, I'd depending on, it also depends on what cover I'm throwing it around. But generally I'd throw that on 15-pound fluorocarbon line on a bait caster, and I'll be flipping that around grass, edges of grass, under docks, edges of docks. Now, if you're gonna go into the grass and go deeper in that cover, of course you want heavier line. So I'll go from 20 to 25. It may seem a little overkill, especially for like some trout guys. They always think it's, overkill of a line, but when you get, a 5-pound bass deep in the cover and it's got you wrapped around the boat dock or the grass or tree limbs, try getting that out with 12 to 15-pound line. It's not going to happen. You're going to break that fish off before anything.
Yeah.
And then for like, let's say that wacky rig Senko, I'll go a 7-foot medium with 15-pound braid. I like the 15-pound braid because I think it's like a 4-pound diameter line, so it's really thin. I could fit a lot on my spool, and it's increased sensitivity. And then I'll put a leader line on there. I'll go from anywhere from like a 8 to 10-pound fluorocarbon, like 12 foot of a leader, and then I'll have that wacky rig on there. So I would say anywhere from 7 to 7.5 feet for both sides, medium to medium heavy. Just depends on the technique you're doing. You could get away with those two and be perfectly fine.
Nice. So what are you going to be, I mean, you kind of talked about like what you could be throwing, what you could be targeting. What else should I guess people know about the spring? Maybe what else part of their setup should they be prepared for?
I think I kind of touched up on the rods. I didn't really touch up on the reels yet.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So a size 2500 reel is generally all you're gonna need for like a spinning reel at least.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bait caster, usually, I haven't bought a bait caster in so long, but I think generally they're around like a 100 to 200 size bait caster reels are gonna be the general consensus for those type of rods, and that's all you really need. One thing though is to have a lot of terminal tackle. depending where you're fishing. As with anything, you're gonna get snagged up. So weights, just extra weights of hooks, kind of double of everything you've got,
Yeah.
and you
For sure.
should be set.
I back in Washington, I used to fish like Banks Lake quite a bit, Lake Roosevelt, and throwing things on jig heads into the cliffs. You're losing a lot of jig heads. Like you got to go make sure you got a bunch of hooks, because it's not if you're going to lose stuff, it's how much you're going to lose during that day.
Yeah, that's another excellent fishery in Eastern Washington is Banks Lake.
For sure.
That's why I only fish in the summertime. So when I hook into a log, I can swim out to it and get it.
So you were talking about how sounds like you mainly use spinning reels. Is there a reason for that over bait casting reels?
Oh well, I mainly, I might have said that as a mistake, but I do mainly use baitcaster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You mentioned you run braid. How come you choose like braid over like monofilament?
So monofilament for bass guys is honestly a thing of the past. Just there's not really not much techniques or lures you'd use monofilament with. You can use it, but braid is kind of the thing now. So braid has, I mean, practically zero stretch. So you get an instant response to your lure with braid. As soon as you twitch that rod, your lure moves. As soon as you set the hook, that lure moves. So if you were to use a topwater frog, you could throw it on, you could use 50-pound braid, but it's only the diameter of 12-pound monofilament. Like you can't use 50-pound monofilament on a bait caster reel. It's just not going to work. It's going to be a disaster. That's the other thing is monofilament has a lot of memory. So if monofilament's been sitting on your reel for even a week, if you're a weekend warrior, free spool that thing and you can see it coils up and it tangles a lot easier.
Yeah.
And another thing is braid is not to rock, but braid is really abrasion resistant. So you could take braid and you could actually cut, pieces of wood with it. Like I have 100-pound braid in my hunting pack wrapped on my Nalgene bottle just in case I need to cut down, limbs or whatnot. So braid, yeah. It's lightweight too, so that's always good. But yeah, I mean that's why I prefer braid over monofilament.
How does fluorocarbon work into that for you?
So okay, I'll kind of explain the three just because I think it's a good thing. So braid, right? Braid floats, zero stretch, very abrasion resistant, except to rocks. You take a rock and you rub braid tight up against it, it'll cut that braid up really easily. And then monofilament, it floats, but it has a lot of stretch, and it's not really abrasion resistant to, I would say, around brush. So trees, wood, it's not that abrasion resistant against that, and it's not invisible like fluorocarbon is, and the fluorocarbon sinks, and it doesn't have as much stretch as monofilament. I think it's in between as far as like how much stretchiness has. It's kind of in between fluoro and that braid. So fluorocarbon is invisible. I think most line companies, I don't know how true it is, but they say around 98% invisible in the water. It sinks. It doesn't have as much stretch. So it's very close to braid. Those are, I mean, braid and fluorocarbon are my two main lines I use.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
One thing I didn't mention though is monofilament is excellent if you're starting out if you're gonna start out bass fishing and you have 12-pound monofilament and you want to throw a crankbait, because when you cast that bait out and you're reeling in that crankbait and a fish hits, you actually want that stretch. You actually want that give for the fish to get hooked well. With braid, you pull the hooks right out of their mouth. With fluoro, it's kind of the same thing. So I think mono has its place when you're starting out, and if it's below 15-pound test, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
That's cool. I know it's very similar in fly fishing. We have different uses for mono and for fluorocarbon, not so much with the braid, just because of the nature of what we're using, but very similar reasons why we do those two lines in our industry or in our fishing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. So let's say this spring, right? I'm a new angler. I'm looking to go fish, let's say Lake Washington, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a boat. What's the best way that I can do some like e-scouting before I head out and kind of figure out where I want to go?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. So generally, like you mentioned, Lake Washington has a ton of shoreline access. Just because it's a bigger lake, obviously, and I would say it's kind of an urban fishery, so they do give that public access to people. To e-scout, I would start by looking at parks, because generally parks, it's obviously easy access, easy parking, and springtime parks are actually one of the go-to places for fish to move up to, especially if that park has a boat launch, because parks hold, or boat launches hold, hard bottom. They need that hard bottom so boats don't wash out the bottom, obviously, but that hard bottom is needed for these fish to spawn. So they'll move up to those areas, and the males will clean the nests off. They'll fan that area and have an exposed spot for them to spawn on. But yeah, I mean, parks, any of the parks, a good one is like Clark Beach Park on Mercer Island. Gene Coulon Park's another good one. Newcastle Beach Park, if it's not too busy. Like all those places, you're gonna have more than enough like areas, depending on how much time you have, to really break down the spring fishing techniques. So
Gotcha.
as far as like that e-scouting goes, yeah.
And so it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities then. If somebody doesn't have a boat, there's a lot of opportunity to hit stuff off the bank then.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I started bass fishing. That's where I took everything in. As a younger angler, I didn't have a boat. I'd have my mom drop me off at the park. That's another thing. If you're a young angler, I think it's easier to convince your parents to drop you at a park compared to like a random shoreline on the lake. So I always recommend parks to people. But yeah, there's more than enough access for anglers with no boats, and springtime is the best actually for shoreline anglers, because like we mentioned before, these fish are moving up shallow to spawn, so you don't need to go deep and fish offshore.
Gotcha. What are some things that people can maybe plan on prior to going out? So let's say somebody's looking at, again, e-scouting, and they're looking at a park maybe, and they're trying to figure out as how they can be successful. Should they look at weather? What kind of weather should they look for? Um, should they pack anything specific? Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah. So generally when you're shoreline fishing, you don't want to haul a ton of rods, obviously, because you're going to be walking. So I have a backpack. I have a couple of tackle boxes in there, and I'll bring 2 rods. One rod, I'll bring a Texas rig Senko weightless. So that's a stick bait Texas rig, no weight, just a soft plastic. That soft plastic is infused with salt, depending on the brand you get, but most of them are infused with salt, so that's more than enough to cast that thing out a ways. And then the second rod would be a moving bait, a crankbait or spinner bait to cover water, right? So I have those 2 rods, and the weightless, you want to probably throw that on a spinning reel. It's just a lot easier to throw that on a spinning reel because it's light. You generally want heavier lures on the bait caster. And then you could throw the crankbait or spinner bait on a bait caster or spinning reel, depending on your skill level. So, and then as far as weather goes, I mean, I always say I try to fish as much as I can, but if, like, let's say you had a day to pick, I would. So let's say in springtime, these fish are looking for consistency in the weather. They want to make sure that weather is stable. They want to make sure that weather is consistent enough for them to move up. Look for breeding grounds and not get pushed off by cold weather or a cold front. So any 3 days is usually like a 3 days of stable weather around the same temperature. It could be sunny or cloudy, but as long as that temperature is stable, especially the night temperature, because in the springtime the nights are still pretty long, so the night temperatures really drop that water temp. So as long as it's stable for 3 days, I'll look for that in the weather, and I'll go out, and then that's what I look for weather wise.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Anything else that you think people should be prepared for to be more successful out there this spring?
Let's see. You got the rods, you got the baits. I would say just cover water. Cover water, cover a lot of water, cover as much as water as you can. Of course, I mean, that's limited to the amount of shoreline access you have, but like I said, these fish, like we already mentioned, going out on a stable weather pattern of 3 days. If that weather is stable enough, and we mentioned that these fish just want to eat and these fish just want to spawn. If you cover water and you throw that crankbait or you throw a spinnerbait and it crosses in front of its sight, it's gonna eat it. And once you find that one fish, there's gonna be more moving up that little area you caught that fish in. And then you could slow down with like a like that stick bait we mentioned. So that's why I like to have a moving bait and a Senko, just so you could slow down and fish that area a lot more thoroughly, because that fish is there for a reason. And then one thing is polarized glasses. They're a huge help. Like, a lot of people don't realize that, but when I started fishing and I never wore them, but the moment I wore polarized glasses. Like it doesn't even have to be anything expensive or brand specific. As long as they're polarized, it cuts the glare in the water by about 80%, and you'll see a lot of fish. Like I said, because they're cruising the shallows looking for that places to spawn. So I think that's a big tip. There is polarized glasses. I mean, you can go to Walmart and pick some up for like $15, or you could even go to a gas station. Sometimes they'll have them for like $10.
Yeah.
For sure. I used to go to Walmart back home, and you could buy like you said, like $15 ones, but then they'd have like this little bin of sunglasses that weren't like in a package, and they're like $5.
Yeah.
Buy a bunch of them, because I don't know about you guys, but man, I lose a lot of sunglasses. Lately, I've been doing better. I've got some better sunglasses that are more expensive and I don't want to lose. But when I was like younger, buying $5 sunglasses, I'd be buying several pair a year.
Yeah, that's how I started. Is those little bin on like the bottom shelf of Walmart in the box. Yeah, no container, no nothing. It wasn't even in any packaging. It just there's like a couple Strike King ones, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of in the same boat, Kyle, until I spent the money and bought myself a nice pair, and now like I'm always putting them back in the same spot, and like if they're not there, I'm like going to find them, because that way I'm just not spending the money and looking for them. Because if you think about it, like over the years, you spend all that money over time, it adds up to, it's like, wow, I could have just bought a pair of nice sunglasses, but everyone's different.
Yeah, I mean, ever since I got a more pricier pair, I've been taking care of my glasses more.
Yeah.
Just because obviously it's expensive, so you're a lot more careful where it goes.
Well, too, you forgot to mention is that it's also like eye protection, because it's like,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
fly fishing, but I found it when I'm bass fishing too. Like you're out there whipping lures around, you bring that back up to someone's face. It's better than them getting a hook to their eye.
Yep, and that tends to happen a lot. Just miss hook sets, and if, like I said, you're casting in and around cover, so you're gonna hook a branch once in a while, and then you just try to shake that thing off, and then you literally put so much force into yanking that thing back, and it just comes flying at you.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Especially like a treble hook. I remember, I think I was like a freshman or a sophomore in high school, and there was a bunch of us fishing this pond in the Yakima Valley. And I was fishing, and I hear just like this bloody murder scream, and I turn around, and one of my buddies had hooked my other buddy in the neck with a crankbait with like a giant treble hook. And it's like, and he wasn't wearing sunglasses, so he was lucky. But yeah, definitely for eye protection.
Oh, you almost need like a full body armor when you're out bass fishing, especially with those treble hooks.
Yep.
And they're all barbed. You get like, and somehow they always, at least for me, they always land up like in weird ways. Like one will hook you, and then it'll like roll and hook you the other way. And you're like, oh, that didn't feel good.
Yeah, the worst is getting it in your clothing. With just any barb hook, but
Yep.
But there's just like it's like more challenging. Like if you had a single barb hooked in your arm, you're like, oh, okay. But like when you hook one in your arm and then you got the other two still pointing up at you, you're like, fuck. Like what do I do?
How do I yank this out
Yeah.
without getting the other two?
Because it's like, yeah, great, you got this one, but now you just put it in your other hand. Now you got to work by getting it out of your other hand. But yeah.
Well, Keaton, you want to ask that question there?
Yeah. So now we're kind of rolling into our favorite time of the night, Adrian. We like to do this at the end of every podcast. It's our rapid fire round. So we'll give you a series of questions here, and just kind of whatever pops up or you can think about first, we'll just roll with it. So
All right, let's do it.
Kyle, you can start us off.
All right. So Adrian, what's your favorite fish to catch?
Smallmouth bass.
What is your dream destination to go fishing?
Brazil for peacock bass.
Nice.
What's your most favorite place that you have fished?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. I like it.
Nice.
What is your favorite meal / drink for a day of fishing?
I like me some flaming hot Cheetos, those peanuts that you get for 99 cents at the gas station,
Nice.
or some like ranch or barbecue sunflower seeds, with like a sweet tea or like a sugar-free energy drink. That's kind of my go-to.
Nice.
All right, Adrian, you're driving to the river or the lake to fish for the day. And we're cruising out there, getting all pumped up. What are you listening to on the radio?
Probably anything Kane Brown or Luke Combs. I've been loving Luke Combs lately.
Nice.
Yeah.
You are headed out the door to go fish. What's the first thing that you grab to go fishing?
Headed out the door, the first thing I grab, like as soon as I head out that door.
Like you're getting ready, you're heading out the door.
Can't leave the house without it.
Yeah, you can't we should just rephrase that question, Kyle. Can't leave the house without it.
Polarized glasses.
That's a common. We need to take tally.
Because I've left them before and I'm like, damn it, I'll drive the 5 minutes, come back and grab them, because they just play such a big part.
For sure.
Just makes your day that much better.
Yeah.
So, Adrian, what's something that you wish you knew when you first started bass fishing?
How much money I'd be putting into this, to be honest, because it's like, I mean, I'm sure with you guys, you could start off with like maybe 1 or 2 rods or 1 or 2 baits or lures or flies, and then you just immerse yourself into it, and it's like you just keep learning new things. And yeah, I would say just how much money I'd be spending into this.
For sure.
So we're getting towards the end of our podcast here, Adrian. We also like to add on your favorite fish, like your favorite fishing story that you know. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be something you learned, something that you didn't know, anything of that sort. So whatever is your favorite fish story, let's end it with this, and we'll end it. You get what I'm saying.
Favorite fish story. That one I'm gonna have to think about. Give me a sec.
Yeah, you're all good.
I think it's gonna have to be I don't know if I have any like a favorite fish story, because I have so much memories, but I think like one thing I will always remember is walking on the pier in California at 4 a.m. to go fishing with my grandpa and my dad. Like I it's really hard for me to think about, a specific fishing story, but I mean that, I don't know, there's just something about the California, just waking up that early as a kid and just walking on the pier.
No.
Thank you, man. That's awesome.
What was like the coolest fish you caught on the pier?
I've caught stingrays. I've caught a hammerhead, like a little one. What else? I
Is
caught,
variety.
yeah, man. It's just the warm water ocean is so much. It's so different. Just so many fish you catch, but I would say it would be. I would say it's the little hammerhead.
Yeah, that's cool.
Heck yeah.
Well, we're ready to send this out.
Let's do it, Keaton. You want me to do it?
Yeah, if you want to do it today, you can.
Sweet. Well, Adrian, we appreciate you hopping on the podcast today and really breaking down a bunch of techniques and insight on bass fishing in Washington. I think people listening to this podcast better be taking notes because you definitely dropped some really good tips. And I mean, like super specific details that I think people can really benefit from and go out this spring or this summer and try to catch a largemouth or a smallmouth. And I'm glad you did touch on fishing both the east side and the west side. Cause I mean, there's a lot of people on the west side, obviously, and it's cool to have that opportunity to do that close to such a big population density, but also either for folks on the east side or people wanting to go on the east side and have a little bit different type of fishery where you're more in the shrub steppe, you're more fishing like the reservoirs off the Columbia or some of those other dams out there, just having that variety. So I'm glad you touched on all those different things. We really appreciate that and hearing a little bit about your background and the fishing that you've done quite a few different places. So appreciate you hopping on there, Adrian.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I really just scraped the top there. There's a lot more to know about bass fishing, but I'm sure we'll chat again soon. We'll discuss more techniques, more lures as this season comes. So yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, we appreciate everybody listening to this episode with Adrian. We also appreciate you guys leaving us reviews and ratings on the various podcast platforms that we are on. Apple Podcasts, we're getting some great reviews. Feel free to go on there, give us a rating, let us know what you guys think, how you're enjoying these episodes. We really appreciate everything that we've heard about, all the feedback that we've heard, and that you guys are going on there and listening. Spotify also has an option to rate us on there. So if you guys could do that, we'd really appreciate it. Head on over to our YouTube channel. We're uploading things, I wouldn't say super regularly, but I mean, at least one video a week. Fly tying tutorials. We got a few of them up there. Some of my favorite guide flies, super easy to tie, super effective. Crank a bunch out in a short period of time. We've got some kind of more of a gear breakdown, talking about what we're packing, things we're using when we're recreating outdoors, putting that on there. And then we also have the podcast on there. You can go to our website. It has links to our YouTube. It's got links to like contact info for some of our guests and a little bit more of a bio. We'll have Adrian send us a bio. You can learn a little bit more about him and any other information he wants people to know about bass fishing. You can go to our website and find that there, listen to the podcast there, and then also our Instagram and our Facebook. You can like or follow us or however you want to do it on those different platforms and just stay up to date. We're updating now that we're both Keaton and I are getting out more hunting and fishing this spring. We're uploading things like semi live on our Instagram stories, and we're posting photos and videos on our Instagram and on our Facebook, and sharing all these events of things that are happening now that the weather's finally getting nice, and hopefully be sharing some photos of Adrian's bass here as he starts pulling some out of the lake. So if you guys could go to all those pages, like and follow us, subscribe to us, I would really appreciate it. Anything else I missed there, Keaton?
Yeah, I just want to add an apology because I've been kind of behind on the website, but because of some personal stuff. But hopefully, I'll be able to get that updated here pretty soon. So,
heck yeah,
that's my only thing. So, And like Kyle said, we appreciate you all for taking the time and just listening to our podcast. It means the world to us.
For sure. And with that, we'll catch you guys on the next one.